there are two common architecture relations you have to be aware of. One is about inheritance, the other one is about client-supplier. Let's talk about inheritance first. The way we draw it on the diagram is by using a red arrow, which means the direction is very important. We go from the child to the parents. So the origin will be the child or descendant classes, and also the destination will be the parent or ancestor classes. You can think about an inheritance hierarchy, which just give you a tree, not a graph, because there's no cycle, just a tree. So you may choose to present each class in an inheritance hierarchy either in a detailed form or a compact form, which means in the classes that you show in the inheritance hierarchy may be presented in a different way. Let's see example over here. Okay, so now this is one example here. You can see this is one inheritance hierarchy. So you can think about this is a child, right? And this is actually a parent. And then because you got this inheritance hierarchy here. And also this is also a child, and this is at the same time also a parent. We can think about this is more like a common ancestor for all the classes below, right? You can see and so on. And you can see, for example, in this particular super parents, we actually only show the compact view by showing that it's deferred. And also in this middle class over here, we actually show the detailed view. Again, it's up to your judgment about which one to show. For example, this is really about the list is just maybe common sense if it's from the library base, and this my list interface will be very important to show all the details. For example, you can see this class over here is deferred, which means it cannot be instantiated directly. And then you show different features section, and also maybe show some contract like a class invariance. And then under that, we also got two implementations over here. They are effective. So one is about my list implementation 1 and my list implementation 2. Right? You can see the hierarchy here is rather straightforward. We get a hierarchy of 4 classes over here. Okay. Another 2 examples to show you. Let's say if you review the database example we talked about, we got database version 1 and database version 2. It depends on what you really want to communicate. So let's say case number 1, if you only want to show the inheritance hierarchy, you may choose to show every class in their in its compact view. So you might just show database version 1, database version 2, all use an oval, and then just show deferred, effective, and effective. And you may want to show maybe slightly more detail by showing what exactly are the features that are being deferred, effective, and also redefined, as we said before. So now you can see this. At the top level here, we have a database generic class is deferred. So in that case, we show the detail view. And then you can see the more detail over here, right? Nothing is new. For example, here you can see add item is simply a defer feature here. Okay, notice that. And then in the middle, we actually got will be the compact view. And for this class, it's actually effective, right? And then we also got another detail view over here for the descending class. And then you can see for this particular add item routine is redefined using ++. So you want to be careful about the notation you use. So you can see these two, number 1 and number 2, they are really showing the same set of 3 classes, but depending on whether you use detailed view versus compact view, and depending on whether you want to show the feature to show is it effective, deferred, or redefined, you can actually got different messages that's carry over to your client. So you have to judge. Okay, so now let's return back to the slides. So we have covered everything about inheritance, so please make sure you understand what the case studies are really about. So you can have different, depending on what your focus might be in your diagram, you might show the same classes in different ways. So you want to make sure you study the details over here. Okay, let's talk about client-supplier, which is slightly trickier. You have to attend to more details rather than just inheritance. So let's just talk about the principle, the definition for what really defines a client-supplier relation. A client-supplier relation exists between 2 classes. First of all, you got a client class, you got a supplier class. The client class uses the service from the supplier class. That's obvious. And then programmatically, so there is a client-supplier relation if the class clients in the class client, there is a variable declaration. So you have to pay attention to variable declaration to identify every client-supplier relation. Of course, you may not have to show every client-supplier relation in your design diagram, but at least to begin with, you should identify every possible client-supplier relation so you can choose. You can be selective. So every time you got any declaration like this form, in that case, you have to decide whether I should include that particular client-supplier relation in my diagram. And variable declaration could be, you might declare an attribute, maybe a parameter in your routine, or it could be a local variable. I would say local variable would be less common unless you believe that particular local variable is very, very important to show. Because typically local variable is hidden. It's more like an implementation secret, but there might be some exceptional scenario that you want to show local variable. But I would say typically it's either attributes or parameter. There's another one over here that's kind of implicit, which is return type. Let's say get birthday, which returns a birthday. In that case, the supplier is also a birthday, right? So, but typically attribute and parameter. Sometimes maybe return type as well. A green arrow is drawn as opposed to red arrow. Of course, in the case where you can only get black and white printing, you cannot really tell the color. But I would say the critical difference between inheritance and client supplier is, for the client supplier, you have to always put labels to denote the supplier name. I'll show you. So the origin should be the clients, and the destination should be the supplier. We'll see example in just a moment. Okay, so as I said, above the arrow, there should be a label, at least one label, indicating the supplier name. And in this case, for example, S1 would be the supplier name of type supplier. Okay, in the case where a supplier is a routine, which means you may have implementation, right? In that case, you gotta indicate whether it's actually deferred, which means without the implementation, it's not implemented. For example, the search in the very top superclass as we talk about. And also it may be effective, or it may be redefined. So you have to indicate when necessary as much as possible. Okay, so now let's see example over here. So let's consider this database code, which we already went through, and then we have also database also makes use of utilities over here. So we let me just illustrate to you what you should really pay attention to when you study for this. Let's take a look at first of all from the database side. Okay, so the database class. So we have a data over here. So now assume that this is a routine or a query, private query. In the implementation code, there should be a do and also end block. But since it's a design diagram, so we don't really show this in the design diagram. So data is simply routine. So later on in the design diagram, we should really indicate whether data is effective or deferred or redefined. In this case, let's assume it actually has some implementation. You know that. So you're going to show that as effective. And also we got our add name over here. We got name exist. Also we got some invariant, right? So now let's try to identify variable declaration. So the number one, it would be this one here. So data of type array of string. So now the supplier, there are actually two suppliers over here. One is the array. The other one is a string. So now we got basically alternative ways for presenting this client supplier relation. We'll see the two alternatives in just a moment. And then the second client supplier relation, just another variable declaration would be NN of type string. It's a parameter, right? And also over here, N of type string. That's just another client supplier relationship. And as I said, it's less common, but let me show you anyway. You might sometimes want to show maybe important local variable client supplier. In that case, maybe because you believe utilities is actually quite an important class that you want to show to your clients, even though it's a local variable, but you will still show. Okay, so now these are the four client supplier relations that we want to show in the diagram. Of course, you might decide you only want to show a selective, like a selection of them. That's okay, but for this case, I'm going to show you all of them. You're going to judge if this is going to be a proper subset to show. And this is basically the main supplier class that we're going to look at. So it's the utilities, and we just got a search routine over here, right? Of course, you might also show client supplier over here, and also type is Boolean. You can see you can even show Boolean is actually a supplier, but you got to think to yourself, is it really necessary to tell your clients who's going to read your design diagram this detail here? Maybe not, right? So you got to judge. So let me just undo this. So just know that there's a search routine over here that we can use, and you also got to do require, and then very rarely you actually show any implementation. For now, I'm just going to cross it out, right? Cross it out because I don't want to show that in the diagram, okay? So now we got these green, pink, and orange 3 client-supplier relations we want to show. And then let me go back to the slides and now show you 2 possible ways for showing them. Okay, so let's go back to the slides. Let me continue with it before I show you the 2 ways for presenting the client-supplier. So the query data over here, array of string, indicates 2 suppliers, string versus array. So now we have a design decision as to should we emphasize about the supplier string or should we emphasize about the supplier array? We got to do either way, but not both. In our design diagram, I'm going to show you both ways. Which one to choose is up to you, but you should know both about the notation. Okay, and also parameters nn and also n. So these are of type string. So there should be a corresponding 2 labels, nn and n. And notice that over here, let's say n and also nn. So these are like just variables. On the other hand, the data over here is simply just a routine. As I said before, if there's a routine, either could be query or a command, you will have to show whether that's deferred, effective, or redefined. Notice that difference there. Okay. Okay, let's see this. And also local variable, which we're going to show you as well. So now in order for you to show this particular client supplier, you also got 2 options. Should you show the utilities over here in compact view, just an oval shape, or you want to show in the detail view, like a square? Okay, I'll also show you that possibility. So you can see there are many combinations over here. Which one to choose is up to your judgment. Okay. Let's say option number 1. If for this particular data array, data array over here, so now array of string, if you choose to actually emphasize that the supplier class is actually a string, in that case, you wouldn't have to mention string name, the string type in the label anymore. Let me show you exactly, okay? But this is the diagram you gotta draw. Okay, let me explain to you how this diagram should be understood. Somehow it corresponds quite closely to the source code. So remember, that's the source code we talked about. And the first one we're going to see, let me start with something simple. How do you draw these 2 client-supplier relationship, which is pink? Okay, first of all, you can see that we know that for that particular client-supplier relation, the client will be the database, right? So this is the origin for the arrow. So this is the arrow that we have to draw, right? So you're going from database to string. It's pretty much like you have over here database, and then over there you have a supplier called nn, and have a supplier called n. So this is where database originates, and then that should be going to the destination of the string class. So that's why you can see the destination is simply a string. Now, whether to show the string class in a compact view or detailed view, again, it's up to you. For now, I'm simply assuming it's a common sense in our domain knowledge. So, and then let me see more details here. So you can see there's a label name, and there's another label name, and they're simply separated by a comma. You can think about n over here is 1 supplier, and then this is just another supplier. And both supplier are of the same type, which is string, and the string class is effective. Okay, that's about the first arrow you have to draw. That one's a simpler one. And similarly, let me do another one before I get to the array. This one here about the local variable, similar way. So now the client, the supplier would just be the utility class over here. Okay. So now you can see again under the context of the database, which is the clients. So now I have this particular arrow over here. So that would be the utilities, and then I put a name because that's U over here, right? So that's the name of the supplier. And now I might just choose to put maybe the detail view for the supplier class. That's my choice. In the next alternative approach, I'll actually show you the compact view. Again, which one to choose is up to you. Okay, over there I can show the header for the search routine, and also I can show maybe require for precondition and ensure for postcondition. That's one option for you. Let's now talk about this particular client-supply relation. Again, as I said, we got 2 supplier types over here. Either we want to emphasize the array, or we want to emphasize the string. Let's say we want to emphasize the string, meaning that when we draw the client-supply relation arrow over there, so now the destination should be the string class over there. So that's what you're going to see. That's what I meant by emphasizing the string. So now let's say this, you can see the string class is still over here as a destination. And now if you look at the arrow over here, so that's green. The arrow over here is originating from database class. Okay, so from database to string. The direction should be no problem for you. So now let's pay attention to the details over here. You can see this is the name of the supplier, which corresponds to the name of the routine over here. Okay, and then notice that I put plus over here, meaning that this particular routine is implemented. Of course, in the code, I didn't really show you the implementation, but you can assume for this particular query, you have the do and end block for implementation. Let's make that assumption there. And then, of course, if data is only an attribute, in that case, you don't have to show any plus, star, or plus plus. But in the case it's a routine, you have to show. And now, what's the type of data? Remember, the type of data is simply data and then array of string. Okay, so now why are we putting dot 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 over here? Dot 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 over here simply means it is corresponding to whatever the arrow is pointing to, because we know that it's already pointing to a string class. So that means we don't need to say string over here. We don't need to. It's also like when you put a label over here for n, you wouldn't put, so n is of type string as a label. That would be redundant, wouldn't it? Because the arrow is already pointing to a string class. It's obvious the type of the supplier is already a string, so you don't need to put it. So this is a minor point here. So you want to make sure when you say array of something over here, this dot 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 is simply referring to this particular class you're pointing to, the supplier class. Okay, so that's about the anatomy of this particular label. Just be careful about the notation. Okay, so overall, the label is going to be data. That's the name of the supplier, and then plus to indicate it's effective, and also the type of the supplier. Because now it's not just of string type, rather it's array of string. So when you point to this particular string class, what's missing there is the array. So that's why you got to put the array over here. And then, because we know that it's pointing to a string, so here we don't need to repeat a string. Okay, say dot 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 over here. Okay, similarly to for n and n, you don't need to say colon string. You don't need to. So that's approach number one. What about approach number two? Let's say we want to emphasize about the array being the supplier. How can we do that? What you would do is like this. Pretty similar to before. So this part here is the same, first of all. So this part here, n and n is still pointing to string. And also the utilities u is also pointing to utility. But now I choose to show you the compact view. Again, compact versus detail, up to you. Okay, so now what about the second approach? Over here, for data, first of all, it's a routine, the name, and also I say plus over here. But now I don't really put any colon of some type anymore, because whatever a supplier class it is now pointing to already tells me the full detail of that about the type. It's going to be an array of string over here, right? You can see the difference here. In version number one, I'm showing, in version number two, I'm showing array of string. In version number one, I'm only showing you the string. So that means in the label part, I need to give you more information. But if it boils down to the same amount of detail you have to present to your clients. But putting in different way just shows different focus. In approach number one, you're emphasizing that the supplier class is actually a string. And for version number two, you're showing the array class over here as a destination. Okay, that's the difference. And now notice that, remember about showing the generic class with instantiation. In this case, array class is generic, but now we're instantiating to be a string type. So that's an array of string. That's why I'm showing it, right? And also the class is also effective. Okay, so that's about the two approaches I want you to understand. So whenever you have client-supplier relation, especially collection type, like over here, and then you have choices about which one to emphasize to show. You want to choose one or the other, but not both. Okay, so now let's return back to the slides to finish off this particular example there. Please make sure you understand the two approaches. So now let's do another example. Oh, before I do that, so this is just the second way, right? I already showed that, already illustrated in detail. So let's do another case study. Let's say we got the list being a deferred class, and also you got the effective descending class array list and linked list. So now I have a design question for you about which design is better. Let's say design number one. I simply got database version 1, and then I got some private implementation. Let's say imp over here is simply can be query, can be attribute. Let's say attributes for now. And then it's simply array list. You can see array list is actually an effective concrete descending classes. Okay? Let's say design number 2. In this case, I will have database version 2, and then also I got implementation here. And now the type is an interface type. It's a list of person as opposed to array list of person. So now the question is, which design is better? Number one. And to answer this one here, you already learned from your introductory tutorial video about the birthday book. You should really program to the interface, but not to the implementation. So that means this design potentially will give you more flexibility about what dynamic type you can actually use. Basically, all the effective descending classes of the list, for example, array list and linked list, potentially can be used to dynamically instantiate the imp over here. So that's why design number 2 is more superior. Now, which design is better? We know that already. And now we want to know, is it possible to actually show, to visualize this program to the interface, but not to the implementation design principle? How can you show it? Okay, so now let's see how we can do it. If you try to show this design diagram over here, and then you will actually see by presenting the design diagram, it's actually much easier to really appreciate the design principle that's being satisfied as opposed to just looking at the code. In the code, it's just implicit, but in the design diagram, it's going to be explicit. So let's say you may, again, if you show the design diagram where you simply just focus on the person supplier class, in that case, it may not be so obvious if the design, which design is actually more appropriate. Let's take a look. Okay, so now let's say this is the first version of the diagram. Let's say for the supplier class, I will simply just show person over here and also person over here, right? So you can see database number 1 and also database number 2, right? According to the definition, declaration over here, one is array list, the other one is list. So the only difference between these two diagrams would be just the label, right? Just the label. You can see the difference is, first of all, imp and imp. Okay, so you can think about maybe routine rather than attributes, but you got to make a decision. Let's say it's a routine. And then array list over here is a type of the supplier, and also list is a type of supplier. So that's the only difference over here, right? You can see versus over here. That's the only difference. However, using this particular version of the diagram where we try to focus on the person supplier class, it may not be so easy for you to appreciate why design number 2 is more superior than design number 1. However, if we try to shift the focus of the design diagram, you will see that very explicitly. We'll see. And don't forget about what ... here really means. We just talked about it a few moments ago. Let's talk about approach number 2. Okay, that's about approach number 1. I talked about it, right? So in this version of the diagram, the focus being person does not really make it easy for us to appreciate the design principle that's being followed. If we try approach number 2, so now in this case, we want to focus on the list or array list supplier class. In that case, you will see why it will be very obvious. Okay, so now the second version of diagram looks like this. So we have some inheritance hierarchy going on over here. Okay, so now you can see over here the supplier name over here is still imp, and it's effective and also effective. So now we don't have to give any more information about array list or list because it's directly pointing to that particular class over here, right? You can see in version number 1 is array list over here of person. And in version number 2, it's actually a list of person. And notice the following. Okay, so there apparently is a slight typo here. So this should be effective. Okay, this should be effective. And this should be deferred, of course. That one has no typo. Okay, just want to show you to you. And then you can see since this class over here is the interface type is deferred. So it has also the 2 effective descendants over here. You can see they're both effective. And either array list of person or linked list of person. You can now see in this second version of the diagram, for design number 1, you can see at the runtime, you only got this particular choice for the array list, being the imp. On the other hand, for design number 2, now the supplier is an interface type. So every effective descendants will be a possible dynamic type that can be used at the runtime. For example, array list and also linked list. You can see it's much more flexible and also a richer set of choices for the supplier. So this design is actually better. You can see also drawing design diagram can also help you judge whether your design is actually better or actually could be improved. Okay, so let's now go back to the slides to finish off this particular case study. And we just talked about. So now finally, the notation you should know in the diagram is about clusters. It's just about grouping the classes into different package or folder, right? Cluster just another name over here. Okay, just one example to show you. Let me highlight the critical things for you. So you can think about this particular cluster. You can see the boundary. It's using the dash border over here, right? There's one cluster. There's one cluster. There's another cluster. And also you can see between this and this cluster, you have a client supplier. So this is client pointing to the supplier as usual, right? Also you put the DB as the name of the supplier. And also you can see for each cluster inside, you also got its own architectural relations between the different classes, right? Pretty easy idea. Just about cluster is just a way to group different classes into their own logical units, really. Okay, so that's about a cluster. You just have to know how to use the dotted, the dashed line border to actually show the clusters. Okay, so that's about the end of the lecture here. So this lecture is not very difficult. You just have to pay attention to the details when you actually show the architectural diagram. So I'll leave the details to you, and also I explain all the tricky parts about what you should really pay attention to, especially pay attention to about client-supplier relations, like which class to focus on for the supplier. So one exercise for you, optional, but I would suggest you do it. So your Lab 0 introductory tutorial series, they introduce these classes. Of course, you might have your own classes as well, but at least these classes, okay? Some class just for the model logic, some class just for testing, and also these two classes are for violation tests, which shows on inheritance. So now the exercise for you would be to draw a design diagram showing the architectural relations for all these classes. Again, your diagram is only meant to be an abstraction, which means you can be selective about what features or what routines, what attributes you want to show in the diagram. But at least for the final diagram there, it should be showing enough information about the architectural relations among all the classes. So for me, for example, me as the reader, I will be able to understand what was really the main idea, what design decision you really want to show to me. Okay, so that'll be an important exercise for you to do, because in the future labs or the projects, you will be required to actually draw design diagrams for your classes. This will be a very good practice for you.